He promised he would bow to the breakfast queen, and he didn't. I don't know, Joe. Well, all right. Labor Day, 1944. I was 18 months old. And my father came into my crib to take me out of my crib, and I tried to stand up, and I couldn't. And I fell down, and I tried again, and I fell down. And he touched my forehead, and in that moment, he knew that the polio epidemic that was sweeping New York City had come to Brooklyn, New York. He picked me up and took me to the corner where the family doctor had an office, and he said, "I think we have a problem." And he held me across his belly so the doctor could do a spinal tap, and doctor was pretty sure. My father took me to the hospital, and he looked around the polio wards, and he thought, I cannot leave my daughter here. I don't know when I'll be able to take her home. I'm taking her home now. Now, we lived in a small apartment building, about 6 stories high, and I think there were about 6 apartments per floor. And I can only imagine the fear that went through that building. And I can only imagine the sense of ostracism that my family must have gone through because people would ignore and avoid us. So sure enough, comes back, and it's polio. And my father called the March of Dimes, and they put me in braces. And they said, well, you know, there's not much to do. We'll just wait until the fever subsides. We'll see what damage has been done, and then that's really about it. And my father was just so confused that there was nothing to be done. And because he was my champion, and because he would never, ever, ever stop until he found an answer, about 4 months in, they noticed that my foot was dropping. And the March of Dimes took off the brace, and they put on a cast, thinking that would help keep the ankle stiffer. And my father knew this was just stopgap again. He read in the New York papers that Sister Elizabeth Kenny was in New York. She was an Australian nurse, and they called them sisters. And he heard that she was in New York and that she had treated an outbreak of polio amongst the Aboriginal peoples, and it seemed to be a good treatment. He called every single hotel in New York City to find her. And when he did, he spoke to her secretary and said, I need Sister to see my daughter. Of course, Mr. Brody, where is she? Which hospital? He said, no, she's not in a hospital. I wouldn't leave her there. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, Sister has come here to try to talk to the doctors, and they're not listening, and she can't risk any more of this negative press, so she's not going to go to any private homes to treat children. And my father was dejected and hung up. And then he watched me that night, and I was kind of going like this. And the first thing he thought, oh, she's so cute. Look at her pushing her hair back. And then he realized it wasn't cute, that something was wrong with my neck, and his terror mounted. And he called her back the next day, and he said, I will do anything to get Sister to come to our house. And she said, okay, because that's the kind of guy he was. And he borrowed a car. He then drove to Manhattan, went to the hotel, and picked her up. Large woman with a very big hat sitting in the front seat, the secretary in the back, and he drove them to Brooklyn. And when they got to the curb, she said, the child's doctor is here, yes? And he said, no. She said, I don't leave the car until the doctor is here. He ran around the corner again and got Dr. Suna, who left a patient, came to get her, and escorted her into our apartment. My mom had laid out blankets on the kitchen table, and I was laid out on the kitchen table, and I had that cast on my foot. And Sister walked in, took off her hat, took out a scissor, and cut off the cast, and my father describes it. She hurled it across the kitchen and said, we are not treating a broken leg here. We are treating polio. And then she pulled out all wool pieces, strips of wool, put them in boiling water, 3 pair of rubber gloves, wrung them out, wrapped them around my leg, and then wrap dry pieces of wool around my leg. And in those days, no plastic, so an oilcloth tablecloth around that so the wet heat would go in, and then a lot of cocoa butter and massage. She felt that if the muscle was in spasm, and you don't allow it to come out of spasm, when it wants to, where is it going to go? So she didn't want bracing, and she just wanted to try to extend the muscles. Now, this was definitely not a cure, but it was a treatment. And in about 6 months, I was up and walking again, unaided. Now, the damage was done. My leg was at least 2.5 inches shorter and 2 shoe sizes smaller in that time. Now, the childhood was not much of a childhood. I couldn't play, and I couldn't run, and I couldn't do most of those things. But what I did do was sit with adults. And as a result of sitting with adults, I learned to be a committed listener, and I learned adult conversation at a very early age. When I was 6, they told me I was going to the hospital. Now remember, I only heard adults talking. And so in 1949, when someone went to the hospital, they didn't go to get better, they went to die. So I thought they were taking me to die. But at 6, you have no grief for a life not lived, and you don't even know quite what that means, except that you're not going to come back. So I gave my brother all my toys, and I said goodbye to the neighbors with a finality they would never be able to read. And I went to the hospital. And when I woke up from surgery, I thought they made a mistake. And I understood in that nanosecond that I had another chance. So everybody in my life always got another chance. And yeah, I took my toys back. So here I am, I'm 6 years old, and I'm getting ready for school, first grade. And my mother gets a book from the library for me. And most of you will recognize this book, right? Do We Love Madeline? And she had to take it out of the library so many times that she finally had to buy a copy. As you can see, it's pretty worn. And I understood my life through this book. So here was a little girl with 11 other little girls at school, and all of them would line up in 2 straight lines, rain or shine. Except Madeline was never content. She would always be looking around to see what she could get into. They went to the zoo, and everybody was cowering, and Madeline looked at the lion in the zoo and went poo-poo, and she was right up at the cage. Madeline had to go to the hospital. I went to the hospital. She had an operation. I had an operation. Her scar was on her belly. Mine was on my leg. But I learned from Madeline that I had to figure out my own path in life, that I wasn't like anybody else around me. When I would go to school, I was the envy of all the kids because I was smart. I read, and I was careful, and I knew my stuff. But in the schoolyard, I was prey. I was marginalized, I was ostracized, I was ignored, and I was bullied incessantly. I was tormented. I had a love-hate relationship with going up to the classroom at a walk-up school, an elementary school in Brooklyn, New York. A love-hate relationship because I had to go up before the schoolyard bell rang so that I wouldn't get caught in all the kids going up the stairs. And they hated me for that. And I needed it, and I didn't want it. During the fire drills, I could stay behind. They hated me, I hated it, but I needed it. So I was always push-pull. Now, did I try to fit in? Oh yeah, I did. I spent a lot of energy trying to fit in. I had 21 jobs in my life, and I was fired from 19 of them. Now, I was a hell of a good interview, wasn't I? But I could never fit the corporate culture. I could never find my place in all of this. And during all this time, I was passing for normal. I was skydiving, I was skiing, not only the Alps, I was skiing the Rockies, I was dancing, I was hot stuff. Sometimes somebody didn't even notice the limp. I was able to camouflage in such a way and compensate in such a way that they didn't know that I had a limp until they saw me walk down the aisle when I got married. So passing for normal was a big thing, and most polios will tell you that there was a time in their life when they could pass for normal. Now, just at the time when Rotary was thinking about polio, I was thinking about it too. All of a sudden, I was having issues that I couldn't identify. I was having some mind-numbing exhaustion, I was having weakness, I was having issues that didn't make any sense. And I went to the doctor, who looked 12 years old and who'd never seen polio, and he said, "Oh, it's part of aging." And I went, "I'm only in my 40s, this is not okay with me. I don't understand what's happening." And he said, "Neither do I." And then I read that Polio International was having a meeting, one of the first meetings that they were ever going to have in St. Louis. And I got in the car, and I drove to St. Louis. I was living in Chicago by then. And I walked into a ballroom this size, and I was sitting with people who were having, the same issues that I was having. And all of a sudden, it had a name, and it was post-polio syndrome. And what did that mean? It meant that all of those hours in jazzercise with my pink leotards and my purple leg warmers were absolutely hurting me. And if I could take back every hour of those, I would. Because all of the nerves that died had neighbors, and the next door neighbor nerves sent out little axons, and they were stimulating what I needed. And those poor things were worn out. And the more I used them, the more they wore out, and the more my symptoms came. So I figured out that I was going to have to sort of rearrange my life as these symptoms came. Now, was I smart to open a bakery and have to work 12 hours a day? No. But I did. I figured out that if I could bake this cake, I started out with a surprise birthday cake delivery service. Remember, I couldn't hold a job. And so I made this cake, and I thought, oh my God, you buy the ingredients, you make the cake, you sell the cake, you get more money for ingredients, you do it again. I got this. So I started this service, and then all of a sudden I had a bakery, not a retail. I didn't want to make anything today that didn't sell, that was not fresh tomorrow. So what I did was have a special order bakery. And I did that for about 9, 10, 11 years. I had a big following. And somewhere in the 9th year, I used to go out to breakfast every day. And I said to my husband, I am so sick of bad food. We had a list on the back door of our home of the 6 places we could stop at to have breakfast on our way to the storefront bakery that I had. And we had to figure out what we wanted to eat before we left the house, because one of them had great omelets, a couple had okay French toast, 3 of them had some pretty good pancakes, and so this is what we had to do. And you know, the coffee was insipid in those days, right? And you would get the coffee, which was barely drinkable, and you'd get it just so it was manageable, and you'd taste it, and you go, oh, okay, I can sort of deal with this. And then the minute you do that, somebody comes over with a pot and says, you want me to warm that up, honey? And if you say yes, you've ruined the coffee for the rest of the meal. And if you say no, you never see her again in this lifetime. So I am eating this junk food, thoughtless. Someone's in the kitchen prepping for lunch and scrambling some eggs and calling that breakfast. And I said to him, why can't anybody make a decent breakfast? And he said, so let me get this straight. Every day you go to that place and you play with butterfly or sugar and eggs. Makes cakes, right? And I said, yeah. He said, what are we eating? Oh, I said, we're eating butterfly, sugar, and eggs. I said, I can do this. And every day I'd go to work and I'd think about this restaurant that I was going to open with the best coffee and beautiful bread and sweet butter that was room temperature. And I would have all of this magic in my head, tablecloths, fine dining, no loud music. And I thought, I got this. I got this covered. And so I opened up my first restaurant when I was 48 years old. I baked that first cake when I was 37. And here I am, 48 years old, opening up a breakfast restaurant. And lucky for me, nobody ever took me seriously. I wasn't serving dinner, so I wasn't a viable critic person, you know, to be criticized. So this was great. I had this big following from the bakery. And here's what I did. I'm gonna reveal it now. I sold Ina bucks. It's like the first crowdsourcing. I said, Joe, you'll give me $10 cash and I'll give you $11 in Ina bucks. 10% return on your investment today. You can't use it for 4 months, give me a head start. But how about that? 10%, not bad, right? And this was in the middle of a recession in 1991. And people gave me $10 and some people gave me thousands. And I had enough to open a restaurant. And it was great success. Best new breakfast restaurant in a century, said the headline in the Chicago Tribune. I thought, this is good. I know how to do this. At least I'll make it up as I go along. And so I did that for a very long time. And here I am, struggling more and more with my energy level, with weakness that's now happening, with swallowing issues some days, with weakness in my hands. I used to be able to throw around 50-pound boxes of chocolate, nothing. And so things are starting to change, but I'm not sure kind of what that means. So I do this, considered iconic, nice. I did it for a long time, 22 years of feeding people, which was an honor and a responsibility. And all this time wondering how I'm going to make this exit. Exit strategy is everything. The minute I moved into that restaurant, I knew I had to figure out a way of getting out. We can't do this forever. Plus, my legs were getting worse. So it came time. And I decided the thing I needed to do was to document this. How did I get from a polio baby growing up in a kosher home in Brooklyn, New York, to being breakfast royalty in Chicago? And I said to my general manager, you know, we have all these great recipes. What are we going to do with them? I said, we probably should put them in a book. And she said, oh yeah, I'll go to Kinko's, we'll do a little spiral-bound book. And I'm going, oh no, we're going to do a book with really good pictures and the stories of how I got here, the stories of what it meant to be, you know, a disabled child, and then to rise up through that with the resilience that I needed to have to get to this place in life. So we did that, and we managed a 4-month closing, and a documentary was made about the last 31 days, which we hope will be streaming pretty soon, and I'll have everybody in this room, you know, notified when that happens, because it's pretty cool. And so here I had this other life now. I could not go to work. I had to have a seat behind the counter where I made the espresso drinks on the weekend because I couldn't stand any longer. Getting up at 4:30 in the morning was getting to be almost, you know, panicky. Trying to feed 450 people in 6 hours on Sunday. I had stopped being able to work the line years ago. So everything was changing and my life was getting much, much smaller. And I decided that the best way to end this was to take what I knew and to pivot to something else. So now I speak at food conferences about the global influences on breakfast from around the world. I speak to women's organizations about exit strategies. How do we get out of what we're in? Sometimes it's just about firing a client. You know how that is if you've had your own business. And so then when Joe said, can you come and talk to Rotary? I've been doing that for years. I go to small Rotary meetings. If it's 7 o'clock in the morning and it's 50 miles away, well, so be it. My job is to keep you motivated. My job is to say post-polio is really bad, and that you spend your time and your effort and your love and your commitment to do what you do is overwhelming for me. to think that in my lifetime, I will see 0. There's no way to describe that. The best way is for me to say, look at the people at your table. Nobody has polio in here. That's pretty damn amazing. And the only thing I want to end with, and I have one quote. So yeah, he's another one of my heroes. But does this not sum up everything you do every day? It does. And my gratitude to you is overwhelming. Thank you, Rotary, for everything you do.